Hello and welcome to Astrology with Zeke. Today this is going to be a continuation of the historical figures series, but more specifically, kind of a continuation of the mini series focusing on the Tudors. Um, so you can't talk about the Tudors without talking about Henry VIII. So of course that's who we're going to be going over. Um, Yeah, very fascinating guy. Is known for the dude who cuts off the heads of his wives and just weird stuff. But when you actually look at the actual history of the guy, he's a very fascinating character. If not, someone you wouldn't want your daughter marrying, given his track record. But nonetheless, still an interesting figure in history. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's just go ahead and dive into his chart. Okay, so first things first, Henry VIII is a Virgo rising. A Virgo rising is someone who's rather meticulous, practical, um, analyzes things. At times they can be overanalyzers, but tend to be fairly intelligent and have an incredible attention to detail. The first thing I notice about him is he has Mars in the first house, so Mars is right there in Virgo, and Mars is all about how we assert ourselves, our drive. So he would be someone who probably could be very argumentative, really needed to be right, um, but also had the drive to really get into the nitty-gritty of things, to really understand things and come to his own conclusions based on the facts. It's also making a trine to Uranus in the fifth house. So this would also make him highly competitive, and also probably got a lot of fun out of doing extreme sports, which, if you look into his history, he was actually really loved jousting, and he didn't just love watching it; he loved participating in it. In fact, he participated in jousting tournaments until an injury that basically forced him out of actually doing that anymore. So, just an interesting thing about the guy that I'd like to point out. So, the other thing I will say is his Mars is at the apex of a pretty big T square. If you look at his chart, it's squaring Neptune in Sagittarius, fourth house, and it also squares Jupiter in Gemini, 10th house. So the one thing I want to point out real quick is what's interesting about him having Jupiter in Gemini is it's actually technically not a really great placement for Jupiter. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. Gemini likes to keep things light. It's kind of the other side of Virgo in that both Virgo and Gemini are ruled by Mercury, so they care a lot about details um, and facts. Whereas Jupiter, the planet, is expansive, optimistic. Um, so having Jupiter and Gemini is just really weird. What that does is probably amplifies a lot of the characteristics of Gemini that likes to move on from one subject to the next. Serious ADHD going on, which is how that squares with his Mars in Virgo that cares a lot about tiny little details and being right. Yeah, at the same time, he's also probably the kind of guy who knew a little bit about a whole lot of things. So it's very strange. Not a bad thing, just very strange. But what is especially weird is the Neptune in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of the optimist, the philosopher, um, the traveler, the ever optimistic person with their eyes on the horizon. And Neptune's all about illusions, and dissolving boundaries. So it looks like, at least privately, um, he was actually probably very into spirituality and philosophies that maybe weren't what they appeared, which is highly unusual, uh, especially for one, someone who's just interested in knowing a little bit about a whole bunch of different things, but especially hard for someone who's all about the facts. So it's just very strange. And for me personally, and it kind of makes sense because we got to remember he broke with the church in order to justify his first divorce to his first wife. And he had all kinds of arguments in order to justify his move or his decision to break with the church and, why the Pope wasn't the true head of the church. And, we could go into really big details if we want to. But what it also shows is he's the kind of person who was very comfortable uh, with coming up with rhetoric that maybe didn't stand up to the lens of truth, but was very comfortable with bending the facts in order to win an argument. So that's kind of how that's rather strange because someone with Virgo and Mars tends to believe they're right and they believe it, but it's odd when you get someone who is knowingly bending the facts but believes they're right. It's very strange. So, I think that about covers that. We'll go ahead and move on to his chart ruler. So, like I said, Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in Leo, 11th house. So, the 11th house is basically what you're known for, your social groups, your peers, who you spend time with. And Leo is the sign of the lion, the Sun King. It's showy. It loves having an audience, and with Mercury being there, that means he had a very charismatic voice. He's one of those people that when he speaks, you feel like you have to listen. He just kind of has that commanding intellect and presence when it comes to his speaking voice. He was probably a really great speaker, especially if you were listening to a speech. Um, just one of those kinds of people. Anyways, and what I really like that's very interesting about his Mercury is it's making a trine to his moon in Aries. So the moon is, all about how we feel nurtured in our private selves. It also has a lot to do with emotion. So what this tells me is, at least when he was in the arena of speaking, giving speeches, is he knew exactly how to pull on people's heartstrings to get his point across. So I would say he was amazing with rhetoric. Amazing. Which, of course, rhetoric is the art of persuasion. Slightly different from logic in that logic has a different set of rules, whereas rhetoric is only concerned with persuasion. So I think he was just really amazing at persuasion, but what's also interesting is his Mercury is making a really nice sextile to Venus and Gemini, which of course means his Venus is in reception as Mercury rules Gemini. It's in the 10th house. So this is has a lot to do with his career and his public persona. So this is the kind of person who really enjoyed conversing about ideas, but I think also loved a spirited debate. Loved a spirited debate, you know, which kind of goes hand in hand with that Mars and Virgo, that person who loves being right. I think he also just really enjoyed, you know, uh, getting into arguments. Which hey, if that's your thing, cool. But I think for some people that could be rather difficult. Anyways, um, yeah, I think that about does it for his Mercury, his chart ruler. Let's just go ahead and move to his moon because we already kind of touched on it. So I figure we might as well keep going. So his moon is in Aries, which the moon in Aries is kind of odd because it's ruled by Mars, and Aries is the sign of the warrior. They're independent. free thinking. They're getting out and going and doing things. They got to be moving and handling business. Uh, so this is just kind of a weird placement for someone's moon. So what this kind of means is they feel secure within themselves. Um, if they're constantly on the go, constantly handling business and always doing something. What's interesting is it's in his eighth house, which I think is very apropos for someone like Henry VIII. Because the eighth house, it's like the house of sorrows, of debts, joint finances, but it also has to do with sexuality. And what that tells me is he loved chasing women. He loved it. He loved the chase, which, duh, given who we're talking about, that's really no surprise. If anything, it's just kind of a confirmation of what's already known about the guy, but what's interesting is his moon is making a sextile to Saturn, which is in the fifth house, and Aquarius, which is all about what we do for fun, creativity, and also non-committal relationships. The fifth house can also loosely be tied to sexuality as well because it has to do with like non-committal relationships. So that's just something that's interesting is because Aquarius it's about the person who puts the tribe above the individual, but it's also the rebel. So it just kind of confirms that he really enjoyed kind of going outside of the boundaries of established rules to get what he wanted. Which again is just so apropos for a guy like Henry VIII, given his history. I mean, yeah. Anyways, yeah, and what's also funny and also very appropriate is his moon is squaring his sun, and his sun is in Cancer. And his sun is also ruled by the moon, so it's in reception, but it also means he was born on a half moon. And the sun in Cancer is all about emotional security, the past, tradition. They love family, and that's why this is a square because, like, privately, he enjoyed all these things that really fly in the face of tradition and a stable family life. As we all know, he was obsessed with obtaining a male heir. And that's part of the reason why, he kept on switching wives because he just couldn't get that boy that he wanted. And that was deeply important to him. But he also just had this highly rebellious side to him that was just kind of like, F you, I'm going to do what I want. And it's just so odd, yet so appropriate for this kind of a guy, you know? It's just very, very interesting. So, yeah, I could talk about his son because it's only making one other opposition besides, the aforementioned square with his moon. It is opposed that Uranus in Capricorn, uh, which again is in the fifth house. So that's just kind of talking about the opposition of like how he kind of enjoyed the extreme sports of his time. Yet he's also this person that cares about like that is about security, doing what's safe, what's best, traditions and stuff. Like people with strong Cancer placements tend to not be adrenaline junkies. They're quite the opposite. So that's why it's just odd, you know. That being said, the only placement he has in Cancer is his son, so that's why I don't think it's, that worth mentioning. But it's just one of those things that's just kind of odd. Like it would be especially odd if he was a person with a stellium in Cancer. That's where it'd be very strange. But yeah. So yeah, I think that about does it for his chart. It's a quick down and dirty one. Um, interesting guy, kind of full of just weird little contradictions. But fascinating, fascinating character. So I think he would be like a really fun to go out with a beer with. But as far as like someone you'd have like a long-term friendship with, I'm not so sure about that. Um, he'd probably be a fun acquaintance, but I'm not sure how good of a friend he would be. Yeah, I definitely don't even want to talk about how good of a husband he would be. Anyways, so yeah, I think that'll about do it for Henry VIII. I mean, I don't have to go into a whole lot of detail about the history of the guy because he's so well known. Um, but yeah, this just goes to show what I love about astrology so much is it's like everything that is known about a person will be reflected right there in their chart. And I mean, it's clear as day. So a lot of the history about the guy that's written about him I would say is 100% true, because it's just so consistent with what's in his chart. But yeah, I think that'll about do it for today. I'll probably continue doing a series maybe on his kids. You know, they're not as well known, but I think it could still be interesting, especially with his daughter Mary, who was, the first, I believe, the first official queen of England, but also wasn't a great queen. That could be interesting. So, anyways, also I do want to mention I do readings professionally. If you want to book my services, you can go ahead and check out my website, astrologywithzeke.com. You can also send me an email with the same domain, astrologywithzeke@gmail.com. I'll go ahead and link that in the description as well as my Substack, where I have different articles written not just about astrology, but also paganism and spirituality in general. So, yeah, I think that'll about do it for today. Yeah, and we'll see you all next time.